Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Beatles Forever. Now, this is a continuation of what I found out about Cynthia and John in regards to her book, John. So today we're going to see how John's success started to affect the relationship between John and Cynthia. Well, John's life got busy, of course, and Cynthia used to go watch him play, but since she was pregnant, she and John felt it would be safer if she stayed home. The fans that followed the band were a large group, and they were a group of girls, and they would line up for hours to see them play. Maureen Cox, who ended up dating Ringo and later marrying him, found out how wild the girls could be. When they were dating, she had to pretend not to know him. One night when she was waiting for Ringo outside in her car, a girl came up and put her hand inside the car and scratched Maureen's face. Maureen quickly wound up the window before things got worse, but understandably she was shook up. So Cynthia kept busy. She kept herself occupied and saw friends, including her best friend Phil. And she had a wedding ring, but she couldn't wear it because she had to keep the wedding a secret. And she wanted to tell everybody about being married and pregnant. Then Cynthia had a scare. One day she found out she was bleeding. John was gone and wouldn't be back for 3 days. And luckily her brother Tony came by to visit, and he called the doctor. And the doctor told her to have a total bed rest. So Cynthia was afraid to move, and she put a bucket near her bed to get to use the bathroom in, and then she had a kettle near her bed to make tea. So John came home, and by that time the bleeding had stopped, and John was glad the baby was okay, and said that Cynthia should have called him, and he wished that he had been there. So Cynthia convinces John to see Mimi. John hadn't spoken to his Aunt Mimi since he got married. Cynthia knew that Mimi was important to John, so after some convincing, he agreed to meet up with her, and Mimi welcomed them back with open arms. She had missed John, but was too stubborn to get in touch with him. When Mimi found out about the group's record deal, she grudgingly said that they had done all right. And when Mimi found out about the near miscarriage, she asked John and Cynthia to move in with her. She said they could live upstairs and that she would live upstairs and they could live downstairs. Well, Cynthia was afraid staying at the flat that she was in, and she could use some company, and the Beatles were due to go back to Hamburg for an extended time, so she would have Mimi there in case there was an emergency. Cynthia, of course, didn't like living with Mimi. When John went away, Mimi started to treat Cynthia like the hired help. She was grouchy and never asked Cynthia how she was feeling. John would call once a week because phone calls internationally were too expensive. Mimi would get on the phone first and stay on with John for 10 minutes, laughing, and then hand Cynthia the phone when time was almost up. Cynthia said that Mimi's passions were money, John, and the cats, in that order. So John gets angry at Cynthia when she got a haircut. So John had been away and was due to come home. Cynthia decided to go to a hairdresser. The hairdresser convinced her to cut her hair shoulder length. After she had done it, she became worried because she knew her hair was the thing that John loved most about her, which sounds kind of superficial to me. So when he saw her, she said she saw hatred in his eyes. He screamed, "What have you done?" and refused to talk to her or look at her for 2 days. Cynthia tried to put herself in his place. John's whole world was changing, and he didn't want her to change too. Cynthia felt she was his anchor. So on the 3rd day, though, he forgave her and apologized, and she never again had her hair cut that radically. While giving birth, Cynthia had her friend Phil to help her get her to the hospital. She expected Mimi to visit her, and she didn't, and she didn't even send her a message. And John didn't even think of being there because back then, fathers weren't present when the baby was born. So Julian was born with the umbilical cord wrapped around his neck, and he had jaundice, which made him yellow, but Cynthia thought he was beautiful. Mimi came the next day, and she wasn't that friendly with Cynthia, but she softened when she looked at the baby. And Mimi told John he was a father. Cynthia was disappointed that she wasn't the one who got to relay the words. Next, John arrives. He came 3 days later, and it was the first time he could get away from the tour. He got Cynthia a private room, and John had tears in his eyes when he saw the baby. He said, "Sin, he's bloody marvelous. He's fantastic." John sat on the bed, and Cynthia let him hold the baby. He held his little hands and was amazed at his tiny fingers, and he said, "Who's going to be a famous little rocker like his dad then?" And he was smiling. Then everyone found out that John was a Beatle, and he had to leave signing autographs before he did. They decided on the name Julian because it was in memory of his mother. He thought it may have been a sissy name and was almost reconsidering it, but both he and Cynthia liked the name, so they kept it. With Cynthia on being a mom, Cynthia knew nothing about being a mom, and she had to learn through trial and error. Julian would cry day and night, and Mimi would complain about not getting enough sleep. John returned a week later and loved his son, but refused to change the diapers and would leave the room when Cynthia did it. John loved watching Julian get a bath and the smell of baby powder, and he loved to cuddle him when he was ready for bed. Well, songs for Cynthia. Cynthia said that John often dedicated the songs he wrote to her. John and Paul would write songs from their experiences, and she was such a part of John's life that it was the fabric of his writing. It was understood that his love songs were our songs. Cynthia was starting to feel like a single parent. She was stuck at home, and Cynthia said she loved Julian, but she knew if she hadn't had him, she would have been able to see more of John. She would have discreetly been able to see him in London or on tour, so she felt shut off from his life. Well, John got to go home, but it was never for long, and when John was home, it wasn't easy to have a normal life, according to Cynthia. In the first few months, they were at Mimi's, and that wasn't easy to relax there, and Julian would be crying all the time. Mimi started to utter that she felt like her house was turned upside down. So near the end, Mimi offered to keep Julian with her upstairs so Cynthia could get some sleep, but Cynthia didn't get much rest, worrying that Julian was disturbing Mimi. And then Mimi said she had been pushed upstairs when she was the one who came up with the idea. So Cynthia wanted to tell the world that she was John's wife, but she wasn't allowed to. Brian wanted to keep it a secret, and John argued with him, saying he didn't mind the fans knowing. And Brian didn't even want Paul to say he was dating Jane Asher, but Paul didn't listen, and it didn't matter to the fans when they found out. But Brian felt that having a wife was a different story. Next, the belated honeymoon. John surprised Cynthia, saying they could honeymoon in Paris. She got John's Aunt Harry to watch Julian, and Cynthia bought new clothes and got Julian packed, and then she had food poisoning. Well, John said they could delay it, but Cynthia was determined to go, and she did. And when they got to France, Cynthia was back to normal, and they stayed at a fancy hotel, the George V. Both her and John felt like they didn't belong there, even though John could afford it. So they went sightseeing, and John bought her an armload of gifts, and among them a gorgeous gray coat, a pretty white beret, and a bottle of Chanel No. 5. Communication. So Cynthia said that her and John got in touch as much as they could, but in those days all they had were letters or the phone, and the phone was expensive. She said they both didn't have time to write letters, and he would try and call her, but it wasn't every day, and they had to rely on trust and patience. She said that neither one of them was jealous when they were apart. It never occurred her to be suspicious. So Cynthia got a break when her mom decided to return to England to live, and she and Cynthia shared a home until her and John could get one themselves. Later, John told her he was going to find them a home in London. He refused to be apart from her any longer. Cynthia was so happy, no more loneliness, no more pretending or hiding. So Cynthia's book, John, makes the reader feel like they're sitting down with a friend and sharing in her private moments. We get to see the good and the bad, and we also get to see John as Cynthia knew him. She already showed that at one time they had a great love together before fame started to tear them apart. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, if you could give it a thumbs up, that would be great. Also, if you haven't clicked on the notification bell, you should. It'll let you know whenever a new video comes out. I hope everybody's been having a good day, and tune in again soon, and I will be doing another episode about John and Cynthia. So have a great day, everybody. Thank you. Bye.